I'm Sir Flowbojan Thunderhammer.
And I'm Teflon Frosthammer.
And I'm Cabbage Tidehammer.
And this
is
WAK.
If Amtgard knighthood means anything, you can't knife a motherfucker and keep it.
And the thing that people need to understand essentially about arts and sciences events is that your scores don't matter.
Do you want a black phoenix or a white phoenix?
Jeez, language, man. We're on
right.
a freaking podcast, for fuck's sake.
Mind-blowing experience, right?
Welcome to WAK, where we discuss topics important to the Amtgard community at large and talk with interesting people from around the foam fighting world. If you like what we do, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help us bring you new and better content. This week, we have, and I'm going to have to take a deep breath for this one, Warlord, Sir Social Justice, Warlord, Wilt Brother Tates, Lord Swoldemort, Liftmaster of Gaines, Tuber of Terror of the Ruby Hills, Kingdom of Crystal Groves, Pareto Swoldemort. Pareto, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, pleasure to join you guys. I just go by Tato.
Okay.
So that's what I prefer.
That's going to make it so much easier for us.
Yeah, well, just don't strain yourselves, because I definitely won't. So,
Tato, how did you get into foam fighting?
I have not thought about that in a long time.
Oh.
So I think I was about 15 or something like that when I had a friend named Bob out in Somerset, Pennsylvania, which is nowhere. Don't Google that. Just Google nowhere instead. And he was playing Amtgard in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, under a shire that was called Twin Lakes at the time. This was kind of back when the eastern side of the United States was a bit of an Amtgard, like dead zone for the most part, aside from like the Crystal Groves proper park. This was like, I think I started in 2001, which is a really long time ago now that I say that out loud. But he described the game to me, brought me out 3 times. We started a shire with some of my friends that had turned 18 and were able to like sign like a contract out of my mom's backyard, right? So, and my mom just like endless supply of like fun noodle and PVC pipe and stuff like that. We had like, we had like 60 kids at one point, but then we were down to like a Amtgard standard 5 or something for a couple of years there. And then after that, I played at Crystal Groves for a long time. There was a shire called Ambient Forest, which was what we started at. I named it when I was 15 because there was I don't even remember why we named it that, because the name doesn't make sense, right? But I was 15, so whatever. And I moved out to Texas for a while and then came back and have played in different places since then. My home park was Ruby Hills for a while back in like 2011, 2012, which is where I think that AmpWiki stuff came in. And then my home park was Bitter Coast for a while. I think that was 2016 to 2018, 2019. And my home park is like somewhere right now. I'm pretty sure it's Rising Sun Station, but there was like some park related like closures, opening stuff, transfers and things like that. So that's pretty much how I got into it. Just had a real great description of like, hey, this game is really fun, play this game. And I read the rule book and saw Warlord and Sword Knight and was like, oh yeah, I want to do that at age 15. And then I did, so that was cool.
So does that mean you actually like made Warlord and Sword Knight at 15, or is 15 the age where you decided that's what you wanted to do?
When I was born, I exploded out of my mother with like a sword and a shield. And just like this comet hit her actually was super weird. But I'm like, yeah, no, I was, I just decided that I wanted to do that when I was young. So I think that took me till I was like 26 or something like that. But it's just my immediate goal was like, yeah, I really want to be good at fighting. There's awards for being good at fighting. I'll do that. So that was pretty much how that went.
Fair enough. Yeah. As far as how naming the parks goes, I think though we haven't officially stated it, the way we generate names is like adjective landmark. So we have Radiant Valley or Mystic Glade or, Ambient Forest. Like it all kind of matches up.
I think if I recall in this conversation was like 2 decades ago at this point, almost exactly 2 decades ago. We wanted to play Cooser State Park, which was a lake surrounded by a forest. And I'm like, what's an adjective for surrounded by? And they're like, ambient. I'm like, chill. We're ambient forest now. And everyone's like, that makes no sense. I'm like, moving on. So
Right.
that was our park's name.
So then the path to Sword Knight obviously is regarded as like one of the most challenging paths someone will make. When you started out on that, what really made you get better?
Practicing was pretty helpful. I guess, that's like a big old question.
So to give you an example of what other people have said, when we talk to people, especially Sword Knights, what made you get better? Almost universally, the answer is like traveling. And if that's the same for you, that's fine. But I just didn't know if there was something unique that you sort of latched onto, whether it was drilling or, traveling or like theory crafting.
I don't like it when people are like theory crafting, because that means like talking about practicing and not practicing, and I hate it. But I definitely, my thing, quote unquote, was like drilling. And part of that was being an education major and like having an actual background in how people learn things for real, and not just how we feel like we learn it, but like how that actually works. And so I learned the block strike set of spells from Span back in 2010. He taught me a lot of them. I came over to his house a lot and he walked me through all of those, did a lot of them with me. And I think that drilling was definitely my my thrust. I think it was definitely the way that I felt was the fastest road to get quite good. And it was especially important where I was from, because most people that I think come up with an answer that honestly it feels like easier, like, oh, well, like traveling or theory crafting and just like really sitting down and thinking about what you're doing. Those, I think people that tend to give those answers tend to be from regions that were already highly developed or already at least moderately developed. And I was not from that region. I was pretty much the best guy in my area almost immediately with any like modicum of practice out of merit of Amtgard being relatively new where I was from. So what drilling did for me was you essentially take, drilling is really just practicing one subsection of fighting at a time and then locking all of that stuff in. So what that allowed me to do was take opponents who would not normally be challenging and make them challenging by merit of taking a subsection of fighting and working on that with them. And it also made them improve rapidly, very quickly. So when I would do a lot of drills with people to help them get a good foundation, and then we would do a lot of regular practice after those kinds of foundations were already in place. So that was really useful for me building up just a base level of skill and building up a base level of challenge where you could get into like the more interesting stuff with practicing different approaches and faking people out and changing up what you're doing and the more advanced stuff, right? But that's just not available until you raise people up quickly. So I saw the power in drilling, and like, not only does this really help me out and automate a lot of parts of fighting that, I guess I should define like what I mean by automating, but essentially like if you have to think about how you block or you have to think about how you throw a shot, you're usually already dead, right? So doing a lot of drilling and automating those pieces frees up a lot of processing power for you to be able to actually think about the fight. And I think much of the time people try to like skip that step and be like very cerebral because it like feels good to outsmart someone without like putting in that foundation. So I've definitely always been a very practical foundation first kind of person. So I would say like drilling was the closest answer that got me to Warlord pretty quickly. And then beyond that, it was definitely travel. There was a year in 2015 where I lived out of my car and off my friends' couches and traveled from Somerset, Pennsylvania, where I was from, to New Mexico, Texas, back to New Mexico. I spent a summer in Kentucky, in Louisville, because they had like 4 or 5 like left-handed fighters there that were very good. I'm like, I'm not very good at fighting left-handed people. I work remote. I'll just stay on my friend's couch and fight left-handed people for an entire summer and just shore up that weakness. And then just bouncing around all across the United States for about a year. And that was extremely helpful, but not something I recommend for people who don't work remote, don't have like a really good financial position. It's not like a healthy thing to do to yourself, but it was very marginally effective. So that was really helpful.
Right.
So you talked about having a group of people that you kind of brought up with you. Was it like a specific set of people, like the wheel had like themselves, like they kind of brought out of each other that way? Or did you have to find, people who are just willing to fight, I guess, at park or something like that?
So for me personally, this is not something that is a reasonable ask for most people, but for me, it was this whole quarter of the United States from like Virginia on up to New England for a time there. I think it started out with my park and then ballooned into adjacent parks. And then we came up with essentially it was called the CG Dojo, which was the entirety of our kingdom in 2016. So that was Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania. A lot of our efforts like expanded up north into New York, Boston, the people that tend to fight there up in Golden Vale. Basically what we were trying to do was make our region a fighting hub by running lots of fighting activities and formalized training using intervals and things like that, and making drilling common knowledge. And the thrust of it was different than the initial like charge into just teaching people to drill. So like, man, it's a lot to think about, right? Because I'm like trying to summarize 20 years for you guys of like working really hard at fighting. But
let me see if I can help out here, because I was watching a lot of the media that was being put out during this period of time. You, perhaps not alone, but you, along with whomever was very close in working with you, really brought fighting to an area. You not only decided that you wanted to be good, but as I see it, you decided that you wanted all of the people around you to be good too. It wasn't just fighting with a small group of people. You started more than one online initiative, and sure, they were just for fun, but like your leads videos, which I know might have been just a goofy project, but it also gave something people to watch. It gave people something to follow. Your dojo would occasionally put out videos. I don't know if that was on purpose or just people that happened to be there filming, but videos of that would go up. And I mean, for someone like me who is in another part of the United States, any content like that where I'm able to analyze other people fighting is going to be helpful. But you did even more than that too. You started putting out some specific training videos. Your distancing video is still quoted today as one of the best resources for learning range out there. So I know that you're a super modest guy, so I'm going to kind of I'm gonna kind of pump the effort that went into this, because there was quite a bit of effort that went in there, and know that there was a whole lot of us out there that still reference that material today, especially when we're talking to younger fighters and trying to explain a point to them.
I appreciate that. I guess a better way of like organizing it chronologically, when I moved back to Pennsylvania from Texas, there was like a 2011 to 2015 like era that was me just kind of like teaching drills and encouraging people to do them. And then when I got back from traveling out of my car for that year in 2016 to, I guess like present day, but really like it feels like 2018 was about when we kind of like started losing a little bit of momentum and stuff there. So that second era was like I think 2016 to 2018, 2019 was that CG Dojo period. And the thrust was different. And I don't want to say that it was completely like selfless kind of thing, because I really wanted to beat people up and be the best, right? Like this was like 5 years ago. I just like lost this keep where I got like second, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to come back with like a fury and a vengeance. I'm going to teach everybody to fight. So I started looking at a lot of sports science books and concepts and reading voraciously, because like fighting is in this weird like, or up until this point has been in this weird, very like 80s movie montage sort of approach where it's like, just work really hard. This is really just like Dragon Ball Z. And if you're not a Saiyan and you're not like constantly bleeding out on the practice field, you're never going to be any good, which is all like fucking bullshit, right? So I read like a lot of sports science books, and I came on the intervals concept, which was like essentially periods of scrimmaging interspersed with drills. So like less drills total, but organized over an hour so that you like randomly have to stop what you're doing and do a drill. And everybody loved that method. So I taught that method from one part to the next part to the next part. We had another guy who came in and started publishing like YouTube videos of like music that he cut and call outs that he cut, so that like everyone in the kingdom was doing the same interval, right? Which is the same structure. We had like a Facebook group going where we would communicate with each other, appreciate each other's fighting, answer questions, ask fun questions to like increase engagement. And the way that I saw it at the time was like, I want to continually increase the engagement with fighting in the hopes that I don't have to teach as much stuff because I'm only one dude, right? And I think the conclusion that I came to was that the improvement in fighting in an area is really about increasing the rate of exchange of information between as many people as possible. Because there's always been this notion in Amtgard that like if you are taught incorrectly, like Wimp Lo from Kung Pao, you'll be locked into bad fighting forever, right? Like if you learn bad habits, you'll be stuck in like this comical inability to fight with no power to like break free of it, which is like as much fucking bullshit as it sounds. But people were very like concerned about this, like, well, you don't want to learn bad habits. I'm like, dude, you just started your own fucking bad habits. Like, good luck. Like, you're gonna have to just break them one at a time, like the rest of humanity. So the way that I saw it, that was pretty much everything that everyone does in fighting was put in place somehow. Like if someone has a bad habit, quote unquote, and I really hate the term at all, but if someone has a habit of using like this, overusing a specific shot or overusing a specific technique without using others, what didn't get there by fucking magic, right? Like people aren't random, you know, it's not like someone high crosses a lot because they just don't know what else to do. It probably killed a lot of people. So the way that I figured it was, just let people teach each other, encourage people to teach each other. Don't worry about what's doing wrong, what people are doing wrong. Just worry about getting them to do the next thing, because if they keep doing the next thing at a pace that's fun and engaging, they'll improve like much faster that way. And I encourage people to teach each other. That's where we came up with the lead exchange project that you mentioned. When I started thinking about how I learned how to fake people out, I started with this almost like playbook approach, like football, like fake this way, do this thing and do this shot, right? And I just learned like 120 different plays until I started to understand faking as a concept. So what I thought about was like, hey, like I'm one person, I only have so much ability to generate content for people, only so much willingness, let alone my ability to do so. I'm just going to get everybody to put up their favorite way of opening a fight so that people learn those, right? Like as quickly as possible. So I think arming people with the permission, right? They didn't need it, but like a lot of times we wanted like, well, I don't want to teach anybody. Like I'm not the best. You don't have to fucking be the best. You have to know one thing and teach that thing, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
It. So I think changing that perspective out here was really the thing, more so than me doing anything Herculean. I think like the effort that I put into it, right, that was like a lot, was just organizing the activities, scheduling meetups, we did fight cards, which was really cool, where I wrote a Java program. I work in Java. It's not the best choice for it all the time. But I wrote a Java program that took like signups for an event and would introduce one fighter to 10 other fighters, and they would just do 10 fights, talk about it to help people meet people across the kingdom. And we had, if you completed them, I think the rule was like, you got one ticket per person that you met and fought from your card, like win or lose. And they would go into a drawing for like gift cards from different foam fighting vendors and stuff like that. And we also used a lot of donations to fly in fighters from out of kingdom to our events, which brought in like a lot more travel and stuff like that. So we had Glenn here, we had Isaac here, Anatole. I can't remember who else we ended up bringing up, but that was really helpful because people were learning like not just my stuff, right? There was one event where I talked because we couldn't find anybody, but I wanted people to see like, hey, not everybody is like a 5'8" on their best day hulking slab of, 80-20 beef like me. I'm 80-20, right? Like sometimes it's 90-10. But so like my way of fighting was not always the best way. So I just wanted to show people that the way that you do this is just find things that you agree with and do that. And then find more things that you agree with and then do that. And then teach the things you know. And at whatever rate people are willing to listen. And just like, if someone teaches you something, we're like, hey, that's wrong. Like, just don't do it, move on. So I think that perspective really helped because fighting became more casual and more fun for us, but people were still trying their best because they felt they were in a place that was safe to be vulnerable, so they could try as hard as they could without fear of like being mocked for doing something wrong. And we got like better and better ideas from people like all of the time. So that was pretty much my long-winded summary of that effort. If that makes sense, I should probably let you guys speak on your own podcast. Sometimes I talk a lot.
No, that's great. Flo has a really bad habit for being long-winded as well, so we could put the two of you in a room and just let you go and then see what comes out.
Hey, you guys could just leave, and I could talk to Flo.
All right, cool. I'll see you.
No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
No, I wanted to discuss a little bit more because you've mentioned Anatole, and we had Anatole on. You said about a year ago, Flo. Mm-hmm. So we had Anatole on about a year ago, and he talked about a lot of the concepts that you did as well. He actually recommended a book to us that I cannot remember the title of right now. It was a book about tennis, but he said the concepts mentally from that applied to Amtgard really well.
That was probably the inner game of tennis. I haven't read that one just yet, but he talked about the main point of that being like the finite game versus the infinite game, like winning individual fights versus, which is the finite game. Mm-hmm. And then the infinite game being your gradual improvement as a fighter over time. It's like a short read. I've had other books to read. So
same, honestly. But it was a recommendation, and it kind of struck me that like a lot of the preparation and a lot of the teaching he did was actually more about the mental game. But I want to talk about, you actually have a project with Anatole, I believe, called the Coach's Codex. Is that right?
Yep.
So I have subscribed. I have not yet had a lot of time to listen. One of our coworkers and resident warlords, Sir Gillen, listens to it pretty religiously, and he's been doing nothing but singing the praises of this podcast, or this, I guess it's a podcast. What do we want to call it here? Either way, he's been singing the praises of it. You're right. We don't know. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and kind of what the focus of that is? Maybe who is it for? We're going to plug it in the notes below the podcast when it comes out. So we'll make sure to put it there. But can you tell people kind of what that is and who it's designed for?
Coach's Codex is for me and Isaac to tell thousands of jokes that are really the same joke. Inside of you, there are two wolves, and one of those wolves is a joke. And we just talk about that one wolf over and over and over again, and we never really get to the second wolf. Coach's Codex was like, I'm going to open a can of seltzer here.
You're fine.
Coach's Codex was the two of us kind of like, we did, he interviewed me on Stab Chats, and it was really, that episode did really well. And I think we were both just bored out of our fucking minds with the pandemic stuff, right? Like, I live in an urban area and everything was shut down, like, and rightfully so, but we were just trying to like keep ourselves sane. So I think I pitched the idea to him, like, let's talk about sports science books, because I love sports science books. I love actually knowing what I'm talking about and reading like factual things as opposed to like insisting things work. You know, I like to find better methods and more effective methods to spend my time on Earth more wisely. So we were actually watching election coverage during the 2020 election. You can see me like start to glaze over even just talking about it. But there was a website called 538.com that ran a lot of like mathematically oriented election projections in a way that was just really salient and sane, which was just a very like comforting island at the time. And I noticed that they published a sports science book because they had like a sports section. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to read this book. I think it would be a cool series to read this book together and apply it to foam fighting, right? Because we don't have, you don't get paid to fight, right? Like, it would be nice, but we're all hobbyists at the end of the day. But regular sports, they have these scientists that are paid like millions of dollars to find out the best way to put like ball A in area B for point C, right? Like tons and tons of fucking money. And there's tons of lessons learned from those studies. So we wanted to take the information from those studies and just like apply them to WAKs and talk about it, and also like have a good time and joke about the two wolves inside of us are really just the one, since we never get to talking about the other one. So it was just like a really great way of using my brain in a time when like I was working from home, not seeing anybody, not getting to fight as much as I want to. I was lucky, and we had like a small bubble of work from home people where we got to practice continuum, but like no events, no parties, no fun social stuff, just a lot of like bleak nothingness. And training tends to be the thing that keeps me like my emotional state pretty regular, right? And like without that, I'm like, oh, well, shit. So we just unpacked that book, and it ended up like ballooning and ballooning and ballooning into like, we were like, oh, let's do like 3 chapters at once. And then one chapter was like, I'm like, dude, I don't know if I can read this. Like, am I stupid? Like, this is so packed with stuff. And I feel like I'm reading at a 5th grade level. Like, is there a graphic novel version of this book? I need more pictures.
Yeah, I need this in manga format.
Yeah, right to left. Would be better, because I am right-handed and I do love Dragon Ball Z, so it makes sense that would be way more digestible. But that was basically how that started. I think it was mostly that like I think that like a holistic emotion that was behind that was it's a really a shame to see hardworking people get burnt out on training at WAKs because they don't know the smart way to train. And all they're offered is like, I remember there was an SKBC in Maryland where someone closed with like, yeah, to be a warlord, you need to be a sociopath, you know, and practice like all the time and kill yourself and be terrible to your friends. And I remember a bunch of my cohorts from Crystal Groves coming to me and being like, is that true? Because that sounds like that sucks. I'll do literally anything else with my time. And I'm like, no, that's not true. So that was basically where that came from.
That's fair. It's funny that you mentioned 538. There, Nate Silver had a podcast as well during that whole time. There was actually one episode of the podcast we did while the election results were being counted, and I don't remember which episode it is, but it's one of our earlier ones, and you can watch us like trying to have a conversation and then also trying to pay attention to the like who's going to be the next president, and we're all fucking panicking because that first night was, you know, kind of dodgy, and then it sort of shifted towards
for sure.
But the 538 podcast though was interesting to me just because it was the first time I had heard of it's some kind of distribution, but it's like 20% of people do 80% of something.
That's the Pareto Principle.
That one, yes. And it was really interesting for me just to kind of learn that, because I've seen it a lot of times, right? Like we would be playing League or something, and like one person on the team is responsible for 80% of the damage. And so like that applies itself everywhere. So it was really cool for us to see that. But one last bit I want to get into about Coach's Codex, and then we can move on. Who would you say Coach's Codex is for? Is it just for people who want to get better at fighting, or is it for warlords that want to hear wolf jokes? Where does it sit in that sort of pantheon?
If you don't want to hear wolf jokes, I'm gonna fucking hang up. Coach's Codex is, I think there's like 2-3 major threats. The first group is people that think that I'm funny. The second group is people who want to coach the people around them and help them get better, because that, I think, is the skill that we're really missing as a community. It's like not just like, how do I practice, but how do I build a community of people around us so that we can all get better together.
Right.
And how do I apply like scientific principles and research to accelerate that process? And then the third group is probably people who are looking to enhance their practice and try to become elite, essentially, because there's like a lot of stuff about like how to maximize your time practicing using different approaches and that kind of stuff. It was extremely, extremely robust. Like there was so much in that book. Like every sentence was like, I was trying to take notes reading this book until I realized I was basically like transcribing the book, because there's so much like in it. And there's not like a lot of introductions or transitions or conclusions or anything. It's just like data. I'm like, stop. Calm down. Sports are not that cool. Stop. But it just kept going on that way for like 250 pages. So I think those are the three groups. People that think I'm funny, people who want to do coaching, and people who are trying to get to that elite level. Okay.
So we know kind of your what got you into the game. We know what sort of you worked at to become a warlord. Tell us about, because the only thing I knew about you before going on this, aside from the Coach's Codex stuff, was that you were at one point a sword knight and you dropped those belts. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Belt singular. We can talk about that. I don't want to name any names or anything. I don't want to get too negative, and you may have to like stop me as I go back into that point of history. But I'm happy to talk about that. Do you guys have specific questions, or do you want me to like retell it as I remember it, or what?
So for me, I think that the most useful thing for the audience here, because I don't know if we've had someone on that has dropped a belt in this way before, was, in your own words, I feel like people view belts in the game as the absolute top of the mountain. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. And a lot of people, when they hear that a knight has dropped their belt, have this attitude like, how could anyone ever do that? After they've earned that, how could they ever go back and drop their belt? So I think that the most useful bit of information here was what was going on at that point in your life and your AmpGuard career that made you say, I'm going to step back from this?
So that was like a tumultuous time, I think, for the country as a whole, right? Because this was like 2016 through 2018,
right?
Period, right? And that was a difficult time for me, especially in my like personal life. But I think the best retelling of it is essentially like, I remember it was right when I got back from that journey of WAK Ascension where I was like driving around. I remember exactly what gas station like I stopped at. I couldn't tell you what state it is, but I could picture exactly where it was. And there was this thread about like how prolific sexual harassment was in our community. This was 2015, right at the end of 2015. And you have to understand that I am deaf, right? So like, if you're not speaking directly to me, I don't understand like side talk. I don't pick it up. I'm not aware of it, right? And I was also raised by like just my mom, right? So I have had like definitely a respect for women there, given that like if I wasn't respectful for my mom, she would beat the absolute shit out of me. She's really strong. So like, she's definitely the OG warlord, and like will put you in an arm bar and then like stuff you full of like stuffed cabbage and like other Polish dishes. Like she's the dragon lady and I'm her special sunshine, and it's just like, so anyway, so there was this thread that was like about how prolific this was in like our kingdom, right? And I was mortified. I was on the board of directors at the time. I think I was like vice president. And I was like, I felt very responsible for like trying to mend this part of our community. And I wrote a sexual harassment policy to implement in our group, which was maybe not the most like bulletproof policy, but it was the best one that I knew how to write at the time. There were some, how to put it, there was some stipulations where like certain things were like automatic bans, right? If you retaliated against someone who reported you, you were automatically banned. You were supposed to be banned if you were attempting to like mediate between the harassed party and the alleged harasser. At the time, you were not allowed to do that. Like it went to the board and they would try to investigate it, which was like maybe not always the wisest thing to do, given that most people are just unpaid volunteers. But I was really trying to make this situation better. And we had a person who was banned by me, and I did that investigation. It was very emotionally difficult to get through the descriptions of the activities, purely verbal at that time. And they were banned for a short period of time, which was another one of my mistakes in the policy, or in that specific ban, where it wasn't just permanent, and it fucking should have been, and I was an idiot for not doing that, right? So I regret that. And then they won a high-level office. Like after they served that ban, they came back, they won people over again, and they won a high-level office. I'm like, well, wait a minute, like this office that they've won is going to allow them to look at some of these reports and things. So that's not acceptable. And additionally, like you can't have like a high-level office person if there's like an issue that arises and like a legal issue, and they look and they're like, hey, do you remember that guy that your organization agreed was like not kosher to keep around? And then you made him in charge, and then something else happened. Like you could imagine that snowballing.
Yeah.
Right. So I kind of stood up and said like, hey, I messaged that person privately and was like, hey, this is fucked. And we really need you to drop this election. Right. And just not do this, or we need to have a conversation about what this means, like as a kingdom. And he took that to be a threat. Right. And a lot of his friends that were knights at the time took that to be extortion at the time, and were like kind of accusing me of like committing a crime at that point. And it was just, I remember thinking like, well, I mean, I didn't threaten this person with anything other than a conversation about their actions in the most general way that we could possibly talk about it. But we have to fucking talk about that. Like that can't stand.
Right.
And so essentially that upset the minority of knights on that circle. There are not that many. And honestly, like most Crystal Gross knights that I know at this point, I have not interfaced with them in a long time. They are good people. They just don't know about that situation. They don't approve of those kinds of situations by any means.
There are a lot of times where they can't know about that situation.
Yeah, that was written into the policy too, right? Like there's a limit to what you can communicate about it. And I think that that's rightful, but it's also difficult to get people to trust you when you're like, hey, I can't talk about this, right? So that's the situation that I'm in. or wasn't at the time. And there was just a couple of nights that were like accusing me of extortion and like blackmail and stuff like that. I'm like, wow, you guys don't fucking know what that word means, but like we can continue down this conversation if you want. And it was exhausting. And it was like every conversation would like degenerate into, Tato, do you remember the time that you like extorted this guy? And I'm like, that's not what happened. I don't know why we need to talk about this. And I started getting very close to a second belt. And I do not know if this was merely my impression or if this was a thing that was actually going on. But I felt at the time that this particular couple of nights were going to like withhold those votes in exchange for like me backing off that particular subject of stuff. And I'm like, not only can I not do that, but I need to absolutely not be in a situation where I'm tempted to do that, because that is not okay. And when I reflected on it, I was spending like tons and tons of time arguing with people about some stuff that I considered to be very, very basic. Like very just like, no, you can't do this. No, this is what the rules say. Like, no, I don't want to deal with like devil's advocate stuff all day. I have a full-time job. I can't be spending my time this way. And I reflected on the amount of effort that I put into fighting as a whole, including like my own athleticism, the game, trying to raise my community. And I'm just like, hey, like I can't afford this. Like my career is doing really well. I can't be spending time on this group of people. So, and I also felt that was also during the time period where Goldcrest dropped his belt for similar reasons. And I felt that I think that came to a head during a situation where there was a knight who did something super shitty and got suspended from our kingdom. They were a knight in a different kingdom and then came to our kingdom where we're like, well, hey, you can't be suspended and be a knight. And they were like, well, yeah, you can. We have to forgive everybody for everything that they do. You know, we just a bunch of stuff. Sorry, I'm getting like a little bit emotional just talking about it.
No, you're fine.
But that whole conversation came to a head at that point. And I'm like, dude, I can't fucking spend time on this. Like, this is bananas. Like, I can't be explaining basic stuff to people all the time for like 8 hours of like 3,000 comments of devil's advocate fucking shit. Like, and I feel like I've done some things for the game that were not only like a huge amount of time, but also a lot of expertise that no one else had at the time. And it was very frustrating that like some of these guys was like, yes, we're going to enter into this peerage, you know, with these guys that are doing and saying these kinds of things. And I'm like, it's kind of shitty. We're not fucking peers. So I'm gonna leave. So I left. And I think it was very emotional at the time, like you said, where they said like, why would you ever drop your belt? You know, and I felt at the time that knighthood should be an office where you are someone to look up to. And that's not something that everyone can sustain forever, right? Like I really felt that if you can't continue to be a good knight, that you should just retire honorably, right? Like what would be wrong with saying like, hey, like Tato was a knight for like 5 or 6 years and it was awesome. And then he was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So he dropped. And it's just, I don't know. It's just, I remember being very sad about it for a long time because it was such a big part of my life for a long time and such a goal for a long time. And I definitely missed like the idea of having like underbelts and stuff like that. Like that was cool. I don't know why that needed to be formalized in retrospect because I can mentor whoever the fuck I want. Like I'm the goddamn Tato, you know, like I'm a great teacher. I also don't have to like insert myself into people's lives and moral decisions. Like we can just talk about WAKs because they're fucking sick, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know, just a lot of stuff there. And I want to close this by saying like this was 2018, the end of 2018. So that was nearly like 4 years ago. And I don't really know. I know a lot of people have been knighted since then that I'm like, hey, that's a good person. That's great. Like, congratulations. And I think that the people that were toxic in that group were the minority, but like it was enough. for me to just be like, this is a waste of my time. I want to work on my career. I want to hang out with my dog, who's the best dog ever on the planet, was actually voted by the 538 people the best dog ever. It was in that book for 120,000 pages of Mang is the best dog on the planet. Like, you can argue with me. So that's it.
So what I really take away from all of this is this for you is a moral stand. So when people ask, why is it would someone ever drop a belt? One of the answers, and I think that this should be a pretty easy one to see, is that this was crossing a line in the sand for you that you didn't want crossed. Is that fair?
I think basically, yeah, I think that that policy was something that I worked really hard on, put a lot of research into, had to deal with a lot of interpersonal fallout that was rightful but uncomfortable to enforce it, and then to see it like ignored and, you know, or warped was like very personally difficult. And I'm just like, I don't want to deal with that.
There's a really ugly part when something like that happens, where you can sort of see the what people are willing to tolerate, right? And the defenses that people will make to make whatever happened okay in their own head. And that is the darkest thing for me. When something like that happens, it's not necessarily the immediate fallout. It's not the immediate, hey, everybody hates you for this thing. It's the amount of like side choosing absent any real information that people will do, and the amount of mental gymnastics they'll do to keep their worldview the way it was before the thing happened.
You know, it's also easy to say that things are mental gymnastics when you don't know their side of it, or you have to keep the sensitive side of it from them to protect people who are victims. And it's like, I don't want to say dark because it's natural, but is incredibly sad, right? Like, in addition to the people who, the few people who do purposely warp things like that in those situations for their own personal gain, enjoyment, whatever, it's sad, it's tough.
So I saw recently that you had gone back out to a tournament. And I say recently, maybe this was 6 months or so back. There was a big post about
November.
Yeah. So was this your first time back out?
Yeah, since COVID, yes. I had a foot surgery in 2017 that took me like 2 years to heal from, and then right when I was like ready to compete again, things shut down. But that was my first one back, and I had like a lot of emotional stuff attached to it. But I was proud of how I did. It was a good time. It was a good training target and that kind of thing.
So I want to pivot to something maybe a little more lighthearted, but as somebody with a vegetable name talking to someone with a vegetable tuber name, how do you get
like
Potato?
Storage.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
How do you get the name Tato or Potato? How does that come about? Because we have a joke that you either get to pick your name and you get lucky, or you get unlucky and somebody picks something that sticks.
Kill me. I was 15 and I made... I was like, dude, like LARP sounds like fucking amazing. And I made these like huge plywood shoulder plates that looked like a frigging Gundam, right? Like at 15, like engineering, carpentry stuff. I covered them with aluminum tape, not aluminum foil, which is how everyone tells the story. But this was like the primo engineering stuff. It was aluminum tape. I showed up to this park for the first time because this was back when they were like, if you had plate that was not like really steel, since it was like harder to come by back in the early 2000s, you would get like 4 points for it or something that was like simulated plate rules like 20 years ago. And I showed up at 15 wearing this stuff, and they're like, you look like a big baked potato, and we're going to call you that for the rest of your life. And I'm like, do I get any say in the matter? And I'm like, no, I can't do that for you. I have a schedule to keep. And I'm like, oh, okay.
So anyway, here you are, Tato. Oh, that's good. We're getting to the point, and we don't have to get into this right now, but we are getting to the point where we ask our guests to tell us their wildest or craziest or funniest story from Amtgard history. So I want you to start queuing up something like that in your head if you have one to tell to us.
Okay.
But before we get to that, just kind of back burner that for a moment. So you're coming back out to tournaments. I want to know, are you trying to go back to a belt, or are you just trying to establish yourself as the best again? What is your goal?
Again, you think I was the best? I've been fucking telling everybody, but you finally got the memo. God, thank God. Thought somebody.
Yeah, we got it for the pre-show notes. Somebody sent it to us, and we were told to read it on air. So that's what I said.
Right. Okay. That person is right.
I sent that.
I don't know. Like, I'm 36, which is not like that old, but it's old for an athlete, oldish. And I think a lot of the training that I did over the COVID-19 pandemic stuff was mostly to just keep my mental health in check. I love fighting. I love thinking about fighting. I love reading about sports science. I love applying practice. I love teaching people. I love training. Like, training's the best. My normal state is working out twice a day, because that's just what I love to do. That's not for everybody, but that's just how my brain works and what I think about. I'm not happy when I don't. And I've been researching more stuff like periodization and mesocycles, microcycles, like how you are actually supposed to structure your training. You're not supposed to go 100% all the time. You're supposed to queue up, queue down, like that kind of stuff. I think that I'm definitely more injury prone than I was when I was in my 20s, and I have to be a lot smarter about it. And I'm still figuring out what that looks like. And I'm also like 5'8" on my best day, which is a tall order or a short one, depending on what angle you're looking at. So it's tough, right? Like when you're shorter than most people, and especially most really great fighters, there is a lot of difficult things that you have to surmount to be competitive. And I also I haven't traveled that much in the past 4 or 5 years, like pandemic, injury. Like, I'm not going to go out to a gathering of the crowns with like my foot in a boot, and try to fight. Like, that's not gonna, like a medical boot. That's just not gonna happen. So I think my goal for myself is to just set sane for the first time, training loads, and just identify them, do the best that I can. I just like spending time on this. It's just a ton of fun. And if that takes me to winning more tournaments, that's great. If it doesn't, I'll have to accept that. At 36, that's just considerable arthritis and a busy career. Then that will be something that I have to accept. But I plan on working as hard as I can, because honestly, it's just really fun.
I want to ask one more thing before we get to the story, too. And so over the course of the pandemic, we were treated, I'm going to call it treated, to Cooking with Tato. This was a reoccurring series that was, you do quite a bit of meal prep and meal planning. And I know that this goes along quite a bit with your personal life and the way that you like to structure your training and things like that, too. It was really great for me as someone who has struggled in the past to find good recipes and cook when it's only me, right? So what made you decide to just start broadcasting this out and kind of doing a pretty regular stream with it?
Well, I think that was about 6 to 8 episodes of stuff. I think that was, so I live by myself. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, I was losing my freaking mind and occasionally figuring out losing the memory of what my own voice sounds like. And I'm thinking to myself, that can't be, I can't be the only person going through that experience. So I'll just podcast something like fun over the app with my phone. And so I chose meal prep because it was the thing that I was doing at the time, and is a very effective way of supporting your training. One of the most difficult parts about maintaining a fitness regimen is just eating the right stuff. It's more expensive to order out when you're like on a training type diet. So there's like lots of like tips and tricks to handle that kind of stuff. So I started meal prepping in 2018 as like a cost savings device. I live in Northern Virginia where it's very expensive. And I just started like researching little tweaks and things like that about how to just make more food more effectively that fit my macronutrient requirements and stuff like that. And just got to drink a lot of bourbon and, you know, cook a ton of food and have a good time while I was doing like 8 hours of like really boring work. Because like when you make like 40 meals at once by yourself, for yourself, it takes like all freaking night, right? So that was just something that I did for fun for a while. I think it does tie into like some of the stuff that I think is interesting for other people, because one of the great difficulties in being a good athlete in our sport isn't necessarily the practice, but the structures around your practice that support it that are not common knowledge. And I think meal prep and diet and training, like physical training, like lifting and cardio, and what is that actually supposed to look like to support your goals? Like, you don't want to run like 6 miles a day. Like, yes, you'll have good endurance, but you'll also pound your joints to ribbons if you're also trying to maintain like a AmpGuard training load, right? Like, people don't tend to know what those supporting structures need to look like, and meal prep is one of those, right? Like, if I'm training twice a day, like, dude, I don't have time to cook. I have time to cook like one weekend a month, right? And you could knock it all out like that. And I just find those kinds of answers to those questions interesting, and I want more people to know about that stuff. So that was why I decided to do that.
Hey, it helped me out quite a bit, and thank you for putting them up.
No problem, man. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for tuning in.
We're not done yet. You get to tell us a story.
Oh.
Yeah, I didn't forget. We do ask that if a crime was involved, after earlier episodes, if a crime was involved, you omit names.
What about extortion? Because I know what that fucking word means. Maybe, kind of. No, it's a lot of syllables. I'm out of breath just thinking about it. So,
I can tell a story about you.
Oh, I know which one it's going to be. Please
tell a story about me. I don't know if I want to go through this again. You can start. You can take the floor. Go ahead.
So, I met you for the first time when I went up to a Great Eastern, I think. We got to fight a little bit up there at the Penzic site. I
remember that.
Yeah,
what year was this?
I don't even remember.
Is that the
one? It's got to be like the 2000s, like before 2010, man. That's got to be like probably like 2006, 7, or 8 or something like that.
If it's the one where you yelled at Lexi when she found out that you were from Knoxville. Oh, okay. I was going to say that's like 2003 or 4.
Holy shit.
So we meet there. We fight for a little bit. It was a fun time. Next time I really get to sit down and fight with you. We had met at different events. After that, we got to fight a little bit on the ditch line. But the next time that I really get to sit down and fight with you is the Olympiad that was held down in Florida, which you came down for. My friends and I, at the time, had gotten into the habit of tabletopping people, or sawhorsing people, where one person gets down on all fours behind someone and then you push them over. Now, I want to point out everyone that was involved in this, except Tato, of course, all knew we were cool with this. We had given permission to each other that we were going to be comfortable with this level of physical assault, I guess I'll call it. We did not have this conversation with Tato. So the plan is, and I'm not involved in this planning at all. I wasn't there when this happened. I was part of the crew that was kind of doing it. The plan is that they're going to get Tato. They really want to get Tato. So I'm going to leave names out for to protect the guilty. But one of the individuals who is a sword knight from our kingdom crawls slowly. I mean, takes 5 minutes crawling over to Tato without him noticing while we're in a conversation, and finally gets lined up and gives the okay signal. Tato has been aware the entire time that this was going on, and as soon as he lines up, he mule kicks backwards and then falls down onto this sword knight's back. And watching the expression of this particular person in both a mix of frustration from being found out and pure agony from having a roughly 280-pound slab of beef fall onto his spinal cord was probably one of the best moments in my life. It definitely makes the top 5.
I'm like in the 230s, 220s nowadays. Like that must have been like 2012. I was like big into powerlifting, and I was gonna get jacked or die trying, and preferably they would like bury me in a wide box. But I was like 280 at that point, which is like for 5'8" was like really wide. I was like really strong. I wouldn't say I was a slab of beef at that point. Like maybe like definitely 75, 25. Like, but I was strong. I remember that was pretty funny. Appreciate that retelling where I was aware of it and not just like really clumsy or something like that. I don't remember that clearly. I remember the injury, and I think they were hurt for a long time, but like later people,
they deserved it,
I guess. I'm trying to think of a good story. There's so many good stories, I guess, that are like just weird party guy stuff from like the 2010s and that kind of thing. That it's hard to pick. It's hard to pick one. I don't know how comfortable I feel like having that recorded.
Hey, that's okay.
It's hard for me to pick. I think the best story to tell is probably about that year that I moved around a lot, and maybe like not all of the details and stuff. But there's one that's like not illegal that I'm willing to tell. And you have to understand that this was before the Donald Trump presidency, so it was really fun to be patriotic instead of sort of morose.
Yep.
But we went to I was working remote and working like a ton of hours, and we went to a gathering of the Crowns from Kentucky. So 20-hour drive one way, back, forth. And I think the people that I was driving with at the time were like, I don't want to be too insulting, but total fucking cowards that made me drive overnight every time because they were like, no, I'm sleeping. I'm like, well, what do you think that I'm like just a machine? But like, so I drove and then I worked like an ungodly amount of hours for like 2 days. And then we were going to go to Battle of the Dens right after, which was an event in Canada the next weekend. So I worked like a ton of hours, and then we drove up like super far. And I was out of my mind at that point. Like I was exhausted, like literally, figuratively, metaphorically. Like I had been traveling for 8 months solid, and I hadn't been in my own bed in like as long, right? And I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I ordered us American flag morph suits when we went to Canada. And when we got there, essentially there was this really bad decision about from Golden Vale at the time, this was 6-7 years ago, where they like literally 8 or 9 people that were from Golden Vale proper when it was a static crown. I hope it's not still. I haven't kept up. Really embarrassing if this went on for like 6 or 7 years afterwards. But there was like a 9-person vote where they're like, no, people from Canada can't be monarch. So we had these, we had 2 shields to go with these American flag morph suits, and one of them was an eagle in front of a flag that says, "This isn't a democracy, this is America," like with an apostrophe. Mm-hmm. And then the other one was like the results of the decision, like a court case where it was like Promethea versus GDP. 2 yes, 3 no, 6 abstain. So she like lost and didn't get to be queen like at the time. So we were I was trying to lampoon like this decision at the time in Canada, which was like a weird thing to do because they were the people who like suffered the fallout of this decision. But I was trying to make fun of the Americans when I went up and did this.
Right.
So when we got there, I had been awake for like 30 hours and had worked overnight so that I would have the time to go to an event. And when I got to where I was staying before we went to the event, there was some kind of situation where we still had like 5 or 6 hours to drive, and no one could rent a car but me. And I'm like, but I brought my own car. Like, why are you doing this to me? So I'm just like, okay, I'll handle it. Like, it's too late now, right? It's not everyone else's fault that they didn't fit the rules to rent a car. So I rented a Jeep Patriot and read the room. And Prometheus was being great. She was like, is there anything that I can do for you? And I said, yes, you could burn me a CD with nothing but Guile's theme on it. And so she burned me this CD, and I was like delirious with how tired I was and had to drive like 6 hours in like not my own car. And we picked up these people from Canada who I didn't know. And I was a little fussy, but just weird. So we listened to Guile's theme for 5 hours on the way down. And like every time the song would change, I would be like, oh, let me turn this up. This is my jam. Or I'd be like, I'm sick of this song. I want to go to another song. And I would click the next button, and it would be the same song. And this went on for like 5 or 6 hours. And this got to a point where Guile's theme was so stuck in my head that, you know, if you ever have a song get stuck in your head and you hear like chunks of it, but it's not all in order, right? You'll hear like one refrain, like one melody, like whatever. So essentially, like I was in physical pain unless I was listening to Guile's theme to make sense of those like discordant chunks of this song. And when I got to the event site, these guys like ran out of my car and then like they did their event, and then I had to drive them back, and it was like Ontario or something, or it was some Canadian city which has like the worst traffic on the planet that I had to drive through. So I was already a little surly, but they had to ride back with me. So I did it again the whole way back. And I swear to God, like they did not like me when I dropped them off. But by the time we got back, we were all friends. Like I literally gave them Stockholm with Guile's theme. And it was great. And we just did like all sorts of other weird American themed stuff. Like we put on the morph suits. We interrupted Bardics to play like Guile's theme and stuff. We screamed, "This is America." It was bananas. It was bananas. There's pictures on Facebook if you go back to 2015. But I think that was maybe the funniest my life has ever been. And yeah, so that was great. So thanks for coming along with me on that journey. I appreciate it a lot.
That's fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, never take a ride from Sir Tato is what we've learned.
Yeah, don't do it.
Yeah.
I brought my own car.
Hey, you can ride in the car with us. We wouldn't do that to you.
Flo only plays Cyndi Lauper, and it's fucking terrible.
That's only because he lost his. That's only because he lost his iPod that had all of the '80s cartoon music.
Yeah.
God. All right. Well, I think that caps it off pretty nicely. Tato, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Lots of fun.
Yeah, I'm going to roll this outro.
One thing. I want to say thank you, specific thank you to all of our Patreons who have been supporting us. If you would like to become a Patreon, if you like what we do, links to how to do all of that will be down in the description below, as well as the links to the Snapchat stuff, yeah?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube or Spotify to get notified about new episodes. And make sure to follow us on Facebook for announcements and more.